Okay. Finissimo. Feed me all night long.
Welcome to Blog Talk Radio. Please enter your host PIN. When finished, press the pound key. To start your show now, press 1. To report an incident. Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Coming at you live from the beautiful heartland of these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is the Rant. I am your host, Charles Lamson. I will be with you for the next 2 hours. Okay. Today's topic: planning pays. Planning pays. Economics and personal finance. Part 9. In the first half of the big show, we are going to have a little seance here and channel the spirit of Alfred Marshall. Okay, once again, so we're going to channel the spirit of Alfred Marshall. We're going to get him on the show. He's going to talk about principles of economics. And also, this is the portion of the show where I'm going to sort of fade into the background and show you my cripple guy fitness techniques, cripple guy fitness strategies, cripple guy fitness exercise tips. I'll show you how, if you're a C6, C7 partial quadriplegic, you want to do a little exercise to, build what little upper body strength you have. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you that while we're listening to Alfred Marshall. So how I usually do that, use very lightweight. I used to use a lot heavier weight. I mean, even being in the wheelchair. The thing is, I'm 50 years old now, and I can lift heavier weight, man, but it hurts bad, really, really bad. Like I'm pulling muscles and stuff. So what I did and not only that, with the slower metabolism and stuff, for all you older people out there know what I'm talking about. It's more important that plus, you're not producing a lot of testosterone. So you're not really building a lot of muscle anyway. So it's really more important to burn fat at this stage in the game, 50 years old, being a disabled guy. It's more important, I've got to keep my weight down to a certain level if I want to keep living independently, so I can have independent transfers, getting in and out of bed and whatnot. So my point being, I'm really trying, maintain the strength I have, the flexibility I have, and upper body wise, and burn as much fat as possible. So So what I do is I have like this little, it's like a 10-pound bar. It's a weighted therapy bar. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. But then I just do tons of reps, and I go from like 40 minutes to an hour. Really more like 40 to 50 minutes. 45, 50 minutes, something like that. And I just do sets with various exercises. I keep it going. And, I do as many reps as I can. Then when I take breaks in between the reps, I count my breaths, my respirations up to 30. So I'm doing a little bit of a sort of a moving zazen type exercise. Uh, get a little meditation in there in the midst of my workout. So anyway, I do count my respirations up to 30, which is about 60 seconds in between sets. And then I just keep doing that for switching the exercises up. And I keep it up. I do some supersets and what have you. And I just keep going for about, like I said, 45, 50 minutes, 40 something like that. Then anyway, I'm going to come back in the second half of the show. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about personal financial planning. More specifically, I'm going to start off talking about basic principles of property insurance. So, all right, here we go.
Of quantity. It must, however, be concerns of value and not of quantity. It must, however, be conceded that the older method of measuring return in terms of quantity often jostled against the difficulty of rightly interpreting a dose of labour and capital without the aid of a money measure, and that, though helpful for a broad preliminary survey, it cannot be carried very far. But even the recourse to money fails us if we want to bring to a common standard the productiveness of lands in distant times or places, and we must then fall back on rough and more or less arbitrary modes of measurement, which make no aim at numerical precision, but will yet suffice for the broader purposes of history. We have to take account of the facts that there are great variations in the relative amounts of labour and capital in a dose, and that interest on capital is generally a much less important item in backward than in advanced stages of agriculture, in spite of the fact that the rate of interest is generally much lower in the latter. For most purposes, it is probably best to take as a common standard a day's unskilled labour of given efficiency. We thus regard the dose as made up of so much labour of different kinds, and such charges for the use and replacement of capital as will together make up the value of, say, 10 days such labour. The relative proportions of these elements and their several values in terms of such labour being fixed according to the special circumstances of each problem. Footnote. The labour part of the dose is of course current agricultural labour. The capital part is itself also the product of labour in past times rendered by workers of many kinds and degrees, accompanied by waiting. End of footnote. A similar difficulty is found in comparing the returns obtained by labour and capital applied under different circumstances. So long as the crops are of the same kind, the quantity of one return can be measured off against that of another. But when they are of different kinds, they cannot be compared till they are reduced to a common measure of value. When, for instance, it is said that land would give better returns to the capital and labour expended on it with one crop or rotation of crops than with another, the statement must be understood to hold only on the basis of the prices at the time. In such a case, we must take the whole period of rotation together, assuming the land to be in the same condition at the beginning and the end of the rotation, and counting on the one hand all the labour and capital applied during the whole period, and on the other, the aggregate returns of all the crops. It must be remembered that the return due to a dose of labour and capital is not here taken to include the value of the capital itself. For instance, if part of the capital on a farm consists of 2-year-old oxen, then the returns to a year's labour and capital will include not the full weight of these oxen at the end of the year, but only the addition that has been made to it during that year. Again, when a farmer is said to work with a capital of £10 to the acre, this includes the value of everything that he has on the farm, but the total volume of the doses of labour and capital applied to a farm during, say, a year does not include the whole value of the fixed capital, such as the machinery and horses, but only the value of their use after allowing for interest, depreciation and repairs, though it does include the whole value of the circulating capital, such as seed. The above is the method of measuring capital generally adopted, and it is to be taken for granted if nothing is said to the contrary. But another method is more suitable occasionally. Sometimes it is convenient to speak as though all the capital applied were circulating capital, applied at the beginning of the year or during it, and in that case, everything that is on the farm at the end of the year is part of the produce. Thus, young cattle are regarded as a sort of raw material which is worked up in the course of time into fat cattle ready for the butcher. The farm implements may even be treated in the same way, their value at the beginning of the year being taken as so much circulating capital applied to the farm, and at the end of the year as so much produce. This plan enables us to avoid a good deal of repetition of conditioning clauses as to depreciation, etc., and to save the use of words in many ways. It is often the best plan for general reasonings of an abstract character, particularly if they are expressed in a mathematical form. The law of diminishing return must have occupied thoughtful men in every densely peopled country. It was first stated clearly by Turgot, Œuvre, Édition d'Air, Book 1, pages 420 to 21, as Professor Cannon has shown, and its chief applications were developed by Ricardo. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Principles of Economics, Book 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by IC Jumbo. Principles of Economics, Book 4 by Alfred Marshall. Chapter 4, The Growth of Population. Section 1. The production of wealth is but a means to the sustenance of man, to the satisfaction of his wants, and to the development of his activities, physical, mental, and moral. But man himself is the chief means of the production of that wealth of which he is the ultimate aim, and this and the 2 following chapters will be given to some study of the supply of labour, i.e. of the growth of population in numbers, in strength, in knowledge, and in character. In the animal and vegetable world, the growth of numbers is governed by the tendency of individuals to propagate their species on the one hand, and on the other hand by the struggle for life which thins out the young before they arrive at maturity. In the human race alone, the conflict of these 2 opposing forces is complicated by other influences. On the one hand, regard for the future induces many individuals to control their natural impulses, sometimes with the purpose of worthily discharging their duties as parents, sometimes, as for instance at Rome under the Empire, for mean motives. And on the other hand, society exercises pressure on the individual by religious, moral, and legal sanctions, sometimes with the object of quickening, and sometimes with that of retarding the growth of population. The study of the growth of population is often spoken of as though it were a modern one. But in a more or less vague form, it has occupied the attention of thoughtful men in all ages of the world. To its influence, often unavowed, sometimes not even clearly recognized, we can trace a great part of the rules, customs, and ceremonies that have been enjoined in the Eastern and Western world by lawgivers, by moralists, and those nameless thinkers whose far-seeing wisdom has left its impress on national habits. Among vigorous races, and in times of great military conflict, they aimed at increasing the supply of males capable of bearing arms, and in the higher stages of progress they have inculcated a great respect for the sanctity of human life. But in the lower stages they have encouraged and even compelled the ruthless slaughter of the infirm and the aged, and sometimes a certain proportion of female children. In ancient Greece and Rome, with the safety valve of the power of planting colonies, and in the presence of constant war, an increase in the number of citizens was regarded as a source of public strength, and marriage was encouraged by public opinion, and in many cases even by legislation, though thoughtful men were even then aware that action in the contrary sense might be necessary if the responsibilities of parentage should ever cease to be burdensome. Footnote. Thus, Aristotle, in Politics, Book 2, Chapter 6, objects to Plato's scheme for equalizing property and abolishing poverty, on the ground that it would be unworkable unless the state exercised a firm control over the growth of numbers. And, as Jowett points out, Plato himself was aware of this. See Laws, verse 740. Also Aristotle, Politics, Book 7, Section 16. The opinion formerly held that the population of Greece declined from the 7th century BC and that of Rome from the 3rd has recently been called in question. See Die Bevölkerung des Altertums by Edward Meyer in the Handwörterbuch der Staatswissenschaften. End of footnote. In later times, there may be observed, as Rocher says, a regular ebb and flow of the opinion that the state should encourage the growth of numbers. It was in full flow in England under the first two Tudors, but in the course of the 16th century it slackened and turned, and it began to ebb when the abolition of the celibacy of the religious orders and the more settled state of the country had had time to give a perceptible impetus to population, the effective demand for labour having meanwhile been diminished by the increase of sheep runs, and by the collapse of that part of the industrial system which had been organised by the monastic establishments. Later on, the growth of the population was checked by that rise in the standard of comfort which took effect in the general adoption of wheat as the staple food of Englishmen during the first half of the 18th century. At that time, there were even fears, which later inquiries showed to be unfounded, that the population was actually diminishing. Petty had forestalled some of Carey's and Wakefield's arguments as to the advantages of a dense population. Footnote. He argues that Holland is richer than it appears to be relatively to France, because its people have access to many advantages that cannot be had by those who live on poorer land, and are therefore more scattered. Quote, rich land is better than coarse land of the same rent. End of quote. Political Arithmetic, Chapter 1. End of footnote. Child had argued that whatever tends to the depopulating of a country tends to the impoverishment of it, and that most nations in the civilized parts of the world are more or less rich or poor proportionably to the paucity or plenty of their people, and not to the sterility or fruitfulness of their land. Footnote. Discourses on Trade, Chapter 10, Harris. Essay on Coins, pages 32 and 3, argues to a similar effect, and proposes to encourage matrimony among the lower classes by giving some privileges to those who have children, etc. End of footnote. And by the time that the world struggle with France had attained its height, when the demands for more and more troops were ever growing, and when manufacturers were wanting more men for their new machinery, the bias of the ruling classes was strongly flowing in favour of an increase of population. So far did this movement of opinion reach that in 1796 Pitt declared that a man who had enriched his country with a number of children had a claim on its assistance. An act passed amid the military anxieties of 1806, which granted exemptions from taxes to the fathers of more than 2 children born in wedlock, was repealed as soon as Napoleon had been safely lodged in St. Helena. Footnote. Let us, said Pitt, make relief, in cases where there are a large number of children, a matter of right and an honour, instead of a ground for opprobrium and contempt. This will make a large family a blessing and not a curse, and this will draw a proper line of distinction between those who are able to provide for themselves by labour, and those who, after having enriched their country with a number of children, have a claim on its assistance for their support. Of course, he desired to discourage relief where it was not wanted. Napoleon I had offered to take under his own charge 1 member of any family which contained 7 male children, and Louis XIV, his predecessor in the slaughter of men, had exempted from public taxes all those who married before the age of 20 or had more than 10 legitimate children. A comparison of the rapid increase in the population of Germany with that of France was a chief motive of the order of the French Chamber in 1885 that education and board should be provided at the public expense for every 7th child in necessitous families. And in 1913 a law was passed giving bounties under certain conditions to parents of large families. The British Budget Bill of 1909 allowed a small abatement of income for fathers of families. End of footnote. Section 2. But during all this time, there had been a growing feeling among those who thought most seriously on social problems that an inordinate increase of numbers, whether it strengthened the state or not, must necessarily cause great misery, and that the rulers of the state had no right to subordinate individual happiness to the aggrandizement of the state. In France in particular, a reaction was caused, as we have seen, by the cynical selfishness with which the court and its adherents sacrificed the well-being of the people for the sake of their own luxury and military glory. If the humane sympathies of the physiocrats had been able to overcome the frivolity and harshness of the privileged classes of France, the 18th century would probably not have ended in tumult and bloodshed, the march of freedom in England would not have been arrested, and the dial of progress would have been more forward than it is by the space of at least a generation. As it was, but little attention was paid to Quesnay's guarded but forcible protest. One should aim less at augmenting the population than at increasing the national income, for the condition of greater comfort which is derived from a good income is preferable to that in which a population exceeds its income and is ever in urgent need of the means of subsistence. Footnote. The physiocratic doctrine with regard to the tendency of population to increase up to the margin of subsistence may be given in Turgot's words. The employer, since he has always his choice of a great number of working men, will choose that one who will work most cheaply. Thus, then, the workers are compelled by mutual competition to lower their price, and with regard to every kind of labour, the result is bound to be reached, and it is reached as a matter of fact, that the wages of the worker are limited to that which is necessary to procure his subsistence. Sur la formation et la distribution des richesses, section 6. Similarly, Sir James Stewart says, Inquiry, Book 1, Chapter 3, the generative faculty resembles a spring loaded with a weight, which always exerts itself in proportion to the diminution of resistance. When food has remained some time without augmentation or diminution, generation will carry numbers as high as possible. If then food comes to be diminished, the spring is overpowered. The force of it becomes less than nothing. Inhabitants will diminish at least in proportion to the overcharge. If, on the other hand, food be increased, the spring which stood at 0 will begin to exert itself in proportion as the resistance diminishes. People will begin to be better fed. They will multiply. and in proportion as they increase in numbers, the food will become scarce again. Sir James Stewart was much under the influence of the physiocrats, and was indeed in some respects imbued with continental rather than English notions of government, and his artificial schemes for regulating population seem very far off from us now. See his inquiry, Book 1, Chapter 12, of the great advantage of combining a well-digested theory and a perfect knowledge of facts with the practical part of government in order to make a people multiply. End of footnote. Adam Smith said but little on the question of population, for indeed he wrote at one time of the culminating points of the prosperity of the English working classes, but what he does say is wise and well balanced and modern in tone. Accepting the physiocratic doctrine as his basis, he corrected it by insisting that the necessaries of life are not a fixed and determined quantity, but have varied much from place to place and time to time, and may vary more. But he did not work out this hint fully, and there was nothing to lead him to anticipate the second great limitation of the physiocratic doctrine, which has been made prominent in our time by the carriage of wheat from the centre of America to Liverpool, for less than what had been the cost of its carriage across England. The 18th century wore on to its close, and the next century began. Year by year, the condition of the working classes in England became more gloomy. An astonishing series of bad harvests, a most exhausting war, and a change in the methods of industry that dislocated old ties, combined with an injudicious poor law to bring the working classes into the greatest misery they have ever suffered, at all events since the beginning of trustworthy records of English social history. Footnotes. For the bad harvests. The average price of wheat in the decade 1771 to 1780, in which Adam Smith wrote, was 34 shillings and 7 pence. In 1781 to 1790, it was 37 shillings and a penny. In 1791 to 1800, it was 63 shillings and 6 pence. In 1801 to 1810, it was 83 shillings and 11 pence. And in 1811 to 1820, it was 87 shillings and 6 pence. For the exhausting war. Early in the last century, the imperial taxes, for the greater part war taxes, amounted to 1/5 of the whole income of the country, whereas now they are not much more than 1/20, and even of this a great part is spent on education and other benefits which government did not then afford. End of footnotes. And to crown all, well-meaning enthusiasts, chiefly under French influence, were proposing communistic schemes which would enable people to throw on society the whole responsibility for rearing their children. Footnote. Especially Godwin in his inquiry concerning political justice of 1792. It is interesting to compare Malthus's criticism of this essay with Aristotle's comments on Plato's Republic. End of footnote. Thus, while the recruiting sergeant and the employer of labour were calling for measures tending to increase the growth of population, more far-seeing men began to inquire whether the race could escape degradation if the numbers continued long to increase as they were then doing. Of these inquirers, the chief was Malthus, and his Essay on the Principle of Population is the starting point of all modern speculations on the subject. Section 3. Malthus's reasoning consists of 3 parts, which must be kept distinct. The first relates to the supply of labour. By a careful study of facts, he proves that every people of whose history we have a trustworthy record has been so prolific that the growth of its numbers would have been rapid and continuous if it had not been checked either by a scarcity of the necessaries of life, or some other cause, that is, by disease, by war, by infanticide, or lastly by voluntary restraint. His second position relates to the demand for labour. Like the first, it is supported by facts, but by a different set of facts. He shows that up to the time at which he wrote, no country, as distinguished from a city such as Rome or Venice, had been able to obtain an abundant supply of the necessaries of life after its territory had become very thickly peopled. The produce which nature returns to the work of man is her effective demand for population, and he shows that, up to this time, a rapid increase in population, when already thick, had not led to a proportionate increase in this demand. Footnote. But many of his critics suppose him to have stated his position much less unreservedly than he did. They have forgotten such passages as this. From a review of the state of society in former periods compared with the present, I should certainly say that the evils resulting from the principle of population have rather diminished than increased, even unto the disadvantage of an almost total ignorance of their real cause. And if we can indulge the hope that this ignorance will be gradually dissipated, it does not seem unreasonable to hope that they will be still further diminished. The increase of absolute population, which will of course take place, will evidently tend but little to weaken this expectation, as everything depends on the relative proportions between population and food, and not on the absolute number of the people. In the former part of this work, it appeared that the countries which possessed the fewest people often suffered the most from the effects of the principle of population. Essay, Book 4, Chapter 12. End of footnote. Thirdly, he draws the conclusion that what had been in the past was likely to be in the future, and that the growth of population would be checked by poverty or some other cause of suffering unless it were checked by voluntary restraint. He therefore urges people to use this restraint, and while leading lives of moral purity, to abstain from very early marriages. Footnote. In the first edition of his essay, 1798, Malthus gave his argument without any detailed statement of facts, though from the first he regarded it as needing to be treated in direct connection with a study of facts, as is shown by his having told Prime, who afterwards became the first professor of political economy at Cambridge, that this theory was first suggested to his mind in an argumentative conversation which he had had with his father on the state of some other countries. Prime's Recollections, page 66. American experience showed that the population, if unchecked, would double at least once in 25 years. He argued that a doubled population might, even in a country as thickly peopled as England was, with its 7 million inhabitants, conceivably, though not probably, double the subsistence raised from the English soil, but that labour doubled again would not suffice to double the produce again. Let us then take this for our rule, though certainly far beyond the truth, and allow that the whole produce of the island might be increased every 25 years, that is, with every doubling of the population, by a quantity of subsistence equal to that which it at present produces, or in other words, in an arithmetical progression. His desire to make himself clearly understood made him, as Wagner says in his excellent introduction to the study of population, Grundlegung, edition 3, page 453, put too sharp a point on his doctrine and formulated too absolutely. Thus he got into the habit of speaking of production as capable of increasing in an arithmetical ratio, and many writers think that he attached importance to the phrase itself, whereas it was really only a short way of stating the utmost that he thought any reasonable person could ask him to concede. What he meant, stated in modern language, was that the tendency to diminishing return, which is assumed throughout his argument, would begin to operate sharply after the produce of the island had been doubled. Doubled labour might give doubled produce, but quadrupled labour would hardly treble it. Octupled labour would not quadruple it. In the second edition, 1803, he based himself on so wide and careful a statement of facts as to claim a place among the founders of historical economics. He softened and explained away many of the sharp points of his old doctrine, though he did not abandon, as was implied in earlier editions of this work, the use of the phrase arithmetical ratio. In particular, he took a less despondent view of the future of the human race, and dwelt on the hope that moral restraint might hold population in check, and that vice and misery, the old checks, might thus be kept in abeyance. Francis Place, who was not blind to his many faults, wrote in 1822 an apology for him, excellent in tone and judgment. Good accounts of his work are given in Bonnard's Malthus and His Work, Cannon's Production and Distribution, and Nicholson's Political Economy, Book 1, Chapter 12. End of footnote. His position with regard to the supply of population, with which alone we are directly concerned in this chapter, remains substantially valid. The changes which the course of events has introduced into the doctrine of population relate chiefly to the second and third steps of his reasoning. We have already noticed that the English economists of the earlier half of the last century overrated the tendency of an increasing population to press upon the means of subsistence, and it was not Malthus's fault that he could not foresee the great developments of steam transport by land and by sea, which have enabled Englishmen of the present generation to obtain the products of the richest lands of the earth at comparatively small cost. But the fact that he did not foresee these changes makes the second and third steps of his arguments antiquated in form, though they are still in a great measure valid in substance. It remains true that unless the checks on the growth of population in force at the end of the 19th century are on the whole increased, they are certain to change their form in places that are as yet imperfectly civilized, it will be impossible for the habits of comfort prevailing in Western Europe to spread themselves over the whole world and maintain themselves for many hundred years. But of this more hereafter. Footnote. Taking the present population of the world at 1,500 millions, and assuming that its present rate of increase, about 8 per thousand annually, see Ravenstein's paper before the British Association in 1890, will continue, we find that in less than 200 years it will amount to 6,000 millions, or at the rate of about 200 to the square mile of fairly fertile land. Ravenstein reckons 28 million square miles of fairly fertile land, and 14 millions of poor grasslands. The first estimate is thought by many to be too high, but allowing for this, if the less fertile land be reckoned in for what it is worth, the result will be about 30 million square miles, as assumed above. Meanwhile, there will probably be great improvements in the arts of agriculture, and if so, the pressure of population on the means of subsistence may be held in check for about 200 years, but not longer. End of footnote. Section 4. The growth in numbers of a people depends firstly on the natural increase, that is, the excess of their births over their deaths, and secondly on migration. The number of births depends chiefly on habits relating to marriage, the early history of which is full of instruction, but we must confine ourselves here to the conditions of marriage in modern civilized countries. The age of marriage varies with the climate. In warm climates where childbearing begins early, it ends early. In colder climates, it begins later and ends later. But in every case, the longer marriages are postponed beyond the age that is natural to the country, the smaller is the birth rate, the age of the wife being, of course, much more important in this respect than that of the husband. Footnotes. On the age of childbearing, of course, the length of generation has itself some influence on the growth of population. If it is 25 years in one place and 20 in another, and if in each place population doubles once in 2 generations during 1,000 years, the increase will be 1,000,000-fold in the first place, but 30,000,000-fold in the second. On the relative ages of husbands and wives. Dr. Ogle, in the Statistical Journal, volume 53, calculates that if the average age of marriage of women in England were postponed 5 years, the number of children to a marriage, which is now 4.2, would fall to 3.1. Korosi, basing himself on the facts of the relatively warm climate of Budapest, finds 18 to 20 the most prolific age for women, 24 to 26 that for men. But he concludes that a slight postponement of weddings beyond those ages is advisable mainly on the ground that the vitality of the children of women under 20 is generally small. End of footnotes. Given the climate, the average age of marriage depends chiefly on the ease with which young people can establish themselves and support a family according to the standard of comfort that prevails among their friends and acquaintances, and therefore it is different in different stations of life. In the middle classes, a man's income seldom reaches its maximum till he is 40 or 50 years old, and the expense of bringing up his children is heavy and lasts for many years. The artisan earns nearly as much at 21 as he ever does, unless he rises to a responsible post, but he does not earn much before he is 21. His children are likely to be a considerable expense to him till about the age of 15, unless they are sent into a factory, where they may pay their way at a very early age. And lastly, the labourer earns nearly full wages at 18, while his children begin to pay their own expenses very early. In consequence, the average age at marriage is highest among middle classes, it is low among the artisans, and lower still among the unskilled labourers. Footnote. The term marriage in the text must be taken in a wide sense so as to include not only legal marriages, but all those informal unions which are sufficiently permanent in character to involve, for several years at least, the practical responsibilities of married life. They are often contracted at an early age, and not infrequently lead up to legal marriages after the lapse of some years. For this reason, the average age at marriage in the broad sense of the term, with which alone we are here concerned, is below the average age at legal marriage. The allowance to be made on this head for the whole of the working classes is probably considerable, but it is very much greater in the case of unskilled labourers than of any other class. The following statistics must be interpreted in the light of this remark, and of the fact that all English industrial statistics are vitiated by the want of sufficient care in the classification of the working classes in our official returns. The Registrar General's 49th Annual Report states that in certain selected districts, the returns of marriages for 1884 to 5 were examined with the following results. The number after each occupation being the average age of bachelors in it at marriage, and the following number, in brackets, being the average age of spinsters who married men of that occupation. Minors, 24.06, their wives 22.46. Textile hands, 24.38, their wives 23.43. Shoemakers and tailors, 24.92, their wives 24.31, artisans 25.35, their wives 23.70, labourers 25.56, their wives 23.66, commercial clerks 26.25, their wives 24.43, shopkeepers and shopmen 26.67, their wives 24.22, farmers and sons, 29.23, their wives 26.91, professional and independent class, 31.22, their wives 26.40. Dr. Ogle, in the paper already referred to, shows that the marriage rate is greatest generally in those parts of England in which the percentage of those women between 15 and 25 years of age who are industrially occupied is the greatest. This is no doubt due, as he suggests, partly to the willingness of men to have their money incomes supplemented by those of their wives, but it may be partly due also to an excess of women of a marriageable age in those districts. End of footnote. Unskilled labourers, when not so poor as to suffer actual want, and not restrained by any external cause, have seldom, if ever, shown a lower power of increase than that of doubling in 30 years, that is, of multiplying 1,000,000-fold in 600 years, 1,000,000,000-fold in 1200, and hence it might be inferred a priori that their increase has never gone on without restraint for any considerable time. This inference is confirmed by the teaching of all history. Throughout Europe during the Middle Ages, and in some parts of it even up to the present time, unmarried labourers have usually slept in the farmhouse or with their parents, while a married pair have generally required a house for themselves. When a village has as many hands as it can well employ, the number of houses is not increased, and young people have to wait as best they can. There are many parts of Europe, even now, in which custom exercising the force of law prevents more than one son in each family from marrying. He is generally the eldest, but in some places the youngest. If any other son marries, he must leave the village. When great material prosperity and the absence of all extreme poverty are found in old-fashioned corners of the old world, the explanation generally lies in some such custom as this, with all its evils and hardships. Footnote. Thus, a village to the Valley Jachenau in the Bavarian Alps about 1880 found this custom still in full force. Aided by a great recent rise in the value of their woods, with regard to which they had pursued a far-seeing policy, the inhabitants lived prosperously in large houses, the younger brothers and sisters acting as servants in their old homes or elsewhere. They were of a different race from the workpeople in the neighbouring valleys, who lived poor and hard lives, but seemed to think that the Jachenau purchased its material prosperity at too great a cost. End of footnote. It is true that the severity of this custom may be tempered by the power of migration, but in the Middle Ages the free movement of the people was hindered by stern regulations. The free towns, indeed, often encouraged immigration from the country, but the rules of the guilds were in some respects almost as cruel to people who tried to escape from their old homes as were those enforced by the feudal lords themselves. Section 5. In this respect, the position of the hired agricultural labourer has changed very much. The towns are now always open to him and his children, and if he betakes himself to the New World, he is likely to succeed better than any other class of emigrants. But on the other hand, the gradual rise in the value of land and its growing scarcity is tending to check the increase of population in some districts in which the system of peasant properties prevails, in which there is not much enterprise for opening out new trades or for emigration, and parents feel that the social position of their children will depend on the amount of their land. They incline to limit artificially the size of their families, and to treat marriage very much as a business contract, seeking always to marry their sons to heiresses. Francis Galton pointed out that, though the families of the English peers are generally large, the habits of marrying the eldest son to an heiress who is presumably not of a fertile stock, and sometimes dissuading younger sons from marriage, have led to the extinction of many peerages. Similar habits among French peasants, combined with their preference for small families, keep their numbers almost stationary. On the other hand, there seem to be no conditions more favourable to the rapid growth of numbers than those of the agricultural districts of new countries. Land is to be had in abundance. Railways and steamships carry away the produce of the land and bring back in exchange implements of advanced types, and many of the comforts and luxuries of life. The farmer, as the peasant proprietor is called in America, finds therefore that a large family is not a burden, but an assistance to him. He and they live healthy out-of-door lives. There is nothing to check, but everything to stimulate the growth of numbers. The natural increase is aided by immigration, and thus, in spite of the fact that some classes of the inhabitants of large cities in America are, it is said, reluctant to have many children, the population has increased 16-fold in the last 100 years. Footnote. The extreme prudence of peasant proprietors under stationary conditions was noticed by Malthus. See his account of Switzerland, Essay, Book 2, Chapter 5. Adam Smith remarked that poor Highland women frequently had 20 children, of whom not more than 2 reached maturity. Wealth of Nations, Book 1, Chapter 8. And the notion that want stimulated fertility was insisted on by Doubleday, True Law of Population. See also Sadler, Law of Population. Herbert Spencer seemed to think it probable that the progress of civilization will of itself hold the growth of population completely in check. But Malthus's remark that the reproductive power is less in barbarous than in civilized races has been extended by Darwin to the animal and vegetable kingdom generally. Mr. Charles Booth, Statistical Journal 1893, has divided London into 27 districts, chiefly registration districts, and arranged them in order of poverty, of overcrowding, of high birth rate, and of high death rate. He finds that the 4 orders are generally the same. The excess of birth rate over death rate is lowest in the very rich and the very poor districts. The birth rate in England and Wales is nominally diminishing at about an equal rate in both town and country. But the continuous migration of young persons from rural to industrial areas has considerably depleted the ranks of young married women in the rural districts, and, when allowance is made for this fact, we find that the percentage of births to women of childbearing age is much higher in them than in the towns, as is shown by the following table, published by the Registrar General in 1907. The urban part of the table is headed 20 large towns with an aggregate population of 9,742,404 persons at the date of the census of 1901. The table compares the rate of increase of population as time goes by. The first comparison is calculated on the total population. In 1870 to 72, population grew by 36.7 per thousand people. In 1880 to 82, population grew by 35.7, which as a percentage of the 1870 to 72 figure is 97.3. In 1890 to 92, population grew by 32 per thousand, 87.2% of the 1870 to 72 figure. In 1900 to 1902, population grew by 29.8 per thousand, which is 81.2% of the 70 to 72 figure. When calculated on the female population aged 15 to 45 years, population increase goes as follows. In 1870 to 72, population grew by 143.1 per thousand people. In 1880 to 82, population grew by 140.6, which is a 98.3% of this 70 to 72 figure. In 1890 to 92, population grew by 124.6 per thousand, which is 87.1% of the 70 to 72 figure. And in 1900 to 1902, population grew by 111.4 per thousand, which is 77.8% of the 70 to 72 figure. The second part of the table deals with rural districts. 112 entirely rural registration districts with an aggregate population of 1,330,319 persons at the date of the census of 1901. The first set of figures is calculated on the total population. In 1870 to 72, the population grew by 31.6 per thousand individuals. In 1880 to 82, population grew by 30.3 individuals per thousand, which is 95.9% of the 1870 to 72 figure. In 1890 to 92, population grew by 27.8 individuals per thousand, which is 88.0% of the 70 to 72 figure. In 1900 to 1902, population grew by 26.0 individuals per thousand, which is 82.3% of the 70 to 72 figure. When calculated on the female population aged 15 to 45 years, we have the following figures. 1870 to 72, population grew by 158.9 per thousand individuals. In 1880 to 82, population grew by 153.5 per thousand individuals, which is 96.6% of the 70 to 72 figure. In 1890 to 92, population grew by 135.6, which is 85.3% of the 70 to 72 figure. And in 1900 to 1902, population grew by 120.7, which is 76% of the 1870 to 72 figure. End of the table. The movements of the population of France have been studied with exceptional care, and the great work on the subject by Levasseur, La Population Française, is a mine of valuable information as regards other nations besides France. Montesquieu, reasoning perhaps rather a priori, accused the law of primogeniture, which ruled in his time in France, of reducing the number of children in a family, and Laplace brought the same charge against the law of compulsory division. Levasseur calls attention to the contrast, and notes that Malthus's expectations of the effect of the civil code on population were in harmony with Montesquieu's rather than Laplace's diagnosis. But in fact, the birth rate varies much from one part of France to another. It is generally lower where a large part of the population owns land than where it does not. If, however, the departments of France be arranged in groups in ascending order of the property left at death, valeur successorale par tête d'habitant, the corresponding birth rate descends almost uniformly, being 23 per 100 married women between 15 and 50 years for the 10 departments in which the property left is between 48 and 57 francs, and 13.2 for the Seine, where it is 412 francs. And in Paris itself, the arrondissements inhabited by the well-to-do show a smaller percentage of families with more than 2 children than the poorer arrondissements show. There is much interest in the careful analysis which Levasseur gives of the connection between economic conditions and birth rate, his general conclusion being that it is not direct, but indirect, through the mutual influence of the two on manners and the habit of life, mœurs. He appears to hold that, however much the decline in the numbers of the French relatively to surrounding nations may be regretted from the political and military points of view,
thank you.
there is much good mixed.
Thank you, Alfred Marshall. I'm going to go ahead and close the circle here, and we're going to send you back to the great beyond, Alfred Marshall. And thank you for coming here and being on the big show. And yeah, you guys won't want to miss the next great podcast. And that's why I'm kind of doing a simulcast here. So I'm also on Blog Talk Radio as well. So, well, if you ever just want to check out the radio show, listen, and say you're just driving, or you gotta clean the house or what have you, you can do it that way as well. You can listen to the show on Blog Talk Radio. It's blogtalkradio.com/Charles Lamson. And I got the blog as well, charleslamson.blogspot.com. Okay, so now, thank you, Alfred Marshall Spirit, for coming on my show, man. It's always a great thrill and pleasure to have spirits of great people from the past come on the big show. I know he was talking about Aristotle a lot, Alfred Marshall, and we've actually had. Oh shoot! What is that? Fourth one. Oh, okay. Actually had Aristotle's spirit on the show as well. Just saying, summon him from it beyond the grave, and he was talking all about his politics, as it were. Okay, really, it's just some guy. It was an audio book. All right, you caught me, but it was. But still, man, I loved that work. I highly recommend it. You can get on YouTube and just in the little search window, just type in Aristotle's Politics. There's the full audiobook there. And it's very interesting stuff. That and Plato's The Republic, which is kind of confusing because it's written by Plato, but it's a Socratic dialogue. It's supposed to be him writing down what Socrates said or a conversation he was having with his buddies. Okay, so anyway. Basic principles of property insurance. Suppose that a severe storm destroyed your home. Could you afford to replace it? Most people could not. To protect yourself from this and other similar types of property loss, you need property insurance. In addition, well, shoot, I don't know. I guess I'm just going to leave that over here. Okay, anyway. In addition, every day you face some type of risk of negligence. For example, you might be distraught over a personal problem and unintentionally run a red light, seriously injuring a pedestrian. Could you pay for medical costs? Because consequences like this and other potentially negligent acts could cause financial ruin. Appropriate liability insurance is essential. No. Oh, come on, man. Yeah. Okay, there you go. Okay, so accordingly, see, where can I put this? Trying to figure out a good place to set my microphone for the radio show, and while I'm doing, okay, I've got a couple different systems operating over here at once. So, anywho, all right. Accordingly, hey, I'm a one-man production crew over here, ladies and gentlemen. So, all right. Anyway, accordingly, property and liability insurance should be as much a part of your personal financial plans as life and health insurance. Such coverage protects assets you have already acquired and safeguards your progress toward your financial goals. Property insurance guards against catastrophic losses of real and personal property caused by such perils as fire, theft, vandalism, windstorms, and other calamities. Liability insurance offers protection against the financial consequences that may arise from the insured's responsibility for property loss or injuries to others. People spend a lot of money for insurance coverage, but few really understand what they are getting for their premium dollars. Even worse, the vast majority of people are totally unaware of any gaps overinsurance or underinsurance in their property and liability insurance policy. Inefficient or inadequate insurance protection is at odds with the objectives of personal financial planning, so it is important to become familiar with the principles of property and liability insurance. The basic principles of property and liability insurance pertain to types of exposure, the principle of indemnity, and coinsurance. Each of these principles is discussed in the following sections. You got types of exposure. Most individuals face two basic types of exposure: physical loss of property and loss through liability. Exposure to property loss. The vast majority of property insurance contracts decline the property covered and name the perils, the causes of loss, for which the insured will be compensated in the event of a claim against their policy. All right, their policy. As a rule, most property insurance contracts impose two obligations on the property owner. 1. Developing a complete inventory of the property being insured, and 2. Identifying the perils against which protection is desired. Some property contracts limit coverage by excluding certain types of property and perils, while others offer protection on a more comprehensive basis. Property inventory. Do you know the value of all the property you own? If you are like most people, you do not, nor do you have an itemized property list for insurance purposes. This is especially important in the case of a total loss. If your home is burned by fire, for example, all property insurance companies require you to show proof of loss when making a claim. And your personal property inventory, along with corresponding values at the time of inventory, can serve as evidence to satisfy the company. A comprehensive property inventory will not only help you settle a claim when a loss occurs, but it also serves as a useful guide for selecting the most appropriate coverage for your particular needs. Most families have a home, household furnishings, clothing and other personal belongings, lawn and garden equipment, and motor vehicles, all of which need to be insured. Fortunately, most homeowners and automobile insurance policies provide coverage for these types of belongings. But many families also own such items as motorboats and trailers, various types of off-road vehicles, business property and inventories, jewelry, stamp or coin collections, furs, musical instruments, antiques, paintings, bonds, securities, and other items of special value, such as cameras, golf clubs, electronic equipment, and personal computers. Coverage for these belongings and those that accompany you when you travel often require special types of insurance. All right, so to help policyholders prepare inventories, many insurance companies have easy-to-complete personal property inventory forms available. These inventory forms can be supplemented with photographs or videos of household contents and belongings. For insurance purposes, a picture may truly be worth 1,000 words. Regardless of whether inventory forms are supplemented with photographs or videotapes, every effort should be made to keep those documents in a safe place where they cannot be destroyed, such as a bank safe deposit box. You might also consider keeping a duplicate copy with a parent or trusted relative. Remember, you may need these photographs and inventories if something serious does happen and you have to come up with an authenticated list of property losses. Identifying perils. Many people feel a false sense of security after buying insurance because they believe they are safeguarded against all contingencies. The fact is, however, that certain perils cannot be reasonably insured. For example, most homeowners or automobile insurance policies limit or exclude damage or loss caused by flood, earthquake, mudslides, mysterious disappearance, war, nuclear radiation, and wear and tear. In addition, property insurance contracts routinely limit coverage on the basis of location of the property, time of loss, persons involved, and the types of hazards to which the property is exposed. Liability exposures. We all encounter a variety of liability exposures daily. Driving a car, entertaining guests at home, or being careless in performing professional duties are some of the more common liability risks. Loss exposures that result from these activities are examples of negligence, the failure to act in a reasonable manner or take necessary steps to protect others from harm. However, even if you are never negligent and always prudent, someone might think you are the cause of a loss and bring a costly lawsuit against you. Leaving the judgment could cost you thousands or even millions of dollars. A debt that size could force you into bankruptcy or financial ruin. Okay, never before. Did I? Oh, shoot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess I should go over this. Well, apparently not. Never mind. Alright, so how do you choose an health insurance plan? Okay, so there are 5 ways to save on health insurance. 1, opt for a marginal care plan. 2, if you're buying an indemnity plan, choose a higher deductible. 3, buy group health insurance. 4, buy while you're healthy. And 5, negotiate. If your health plan covers services you won't use, ask if you can eliminate them from your policy to lower your cost. Okay, so you must choose one or more plans to provide coverage for you and your dependents. If you are employed, first review the various health insurance plans your company offers. If you can't get coverage from an employer, get plan descriptions and policy costs from several providers, including a group plan from a professional or trade organization. Then take your time and carefully read the plan materials to understand exactly what is covered and at what cost. Next, add up what you have spent on medical costs over the past few years and what you might expect to spend in the future, so you can see what your costs would be under various plans. So how do you find health insurance? If you have just graduated from college, okay, how do you find health? Okay, you don't have a job. It can no longer. Okay, wait a minute. All right, I did cover this in the last show. So not only did I cover this in the last show, I'm pretty dang sure I went over that Alfred Marshall material twice. Or, I'm sorry, I meant when I summoned Alfred Marshall's spirit from the grave, I think he repeated himself. And he went over the same exact material that I covered in my last YouTube clip and podcast. So, hey, whatever, man. Stuff happens, I was sitting there. I was laying there. I was working out, and getting my pump on, as they say, as the kids want to say nowadays. And I was getting my pump on, and I started listening to that. And I was like, "Oh man, this was okay. We already listened to this." Anyway, hey, whatever, man. Stuff happens, right? It's live radio, folks, or live internet radio, live YouTube clip stuff. Okay, my YouTube, I haven't started going live yet, but it's actually recorded. But you'll be seeing it later. But I think I'm gonna start going live here as well. Yeah, I forgot to do it. So yeah, I'm just gonna start going live here. Probably on the next show, next big shoe. Okay, moving on. Moving on. Moving on. Moving on. Never don't do it too good to me. God, I can't get that Ted Nugent song out of my head. Free for all. I was listening to I was listening to the Forbidden Alex Jones earlier today, and he always uses that Ted Nugent bumper music. Can't get it out of my head. That stupid free for all song. When in doubt, I whip it out. Got me a rock and roll band. It's a free for all. Ooh, baby. Yeah, it's a free for all. Ow, suck it. All right. So, renter's insurance. Don't move in without it. If you live in an apartment or some other type of rental unit, as you can tell, this is a rental unit that I live in. You should be aware that, hey, but I'm moving up pretty soon, ladies and gentlemen. So that's a big development that's on the way. So we got that to look forward to here in Lamson land. But I'm going to be moving up to the east side to a deluxe apartment in the sky. Okay, renter's insurance. Don't move in without it. Oh, actually, I think it's going to be a house. But we'll see. I'll keep you posted. If you live in an apartment or some other type of rental unit, you should be aware that although the building you live in is very likely fully insured, your furnishings and other personal belongings are not. As a renter or even the owner of a condominium unit, you need a special type of HO policy, homeowner policy, to obtain insurance coverage on your personal possessions. Okay. So, consider, for example, the predicament of Lois Weaver. She never got around to insuring her personal possessions in the apartment she rented in Denver. One wintry night, a water pipe ruptured, and escaping water damaged her furniture, rugs, and other belongings. When the building owner refused to pay for the loss, Miss Weaver hauled him into court and lost. Why did she lose her case? Simple. Unless a landlord can be proven negligent, and this one wasn't, he or she is not responsible for a tenant's property. Shit happens, man. The moral of this is very clear. Once you have accumulated personal belongings of value, from clothing and home furnishings to stereo equipment, TVs, computers, and DVD players, make sure they were adequately covered by insurance, even if you are only renting a place to live. Otherwise, you could risk losing everything you own, Jack. Apparently, many tenants do not realize this because surveys show most of them are without insurance, although renter's insurance is available at very reasonable rates. The policy, called Renter's Form HO4, is a scaled down version of homeowners insurance. It covers the contents of a house, apartment, or cooperative unit, but not the structure itself. Owners of condominium units need form HO6. It is similar, but includes a minimum of $1,000 in protection for any building alterations, additions, and decorations paid for by the policyholder. So, like regular homeowners insurance, HO4 and HO6 policies include liability coverage and protect you at home and away. HO4 and HO6 policies include liability coverage and protect you at home and away. For example, if somebody is injured and sues you, the policy would pay for damages up to a specified limit, generally $100,000, although some insurers go as high as $500,000. Okay, I know this. At this point, you're thinking, "Oh shit, this is the part where he's going to start trying to sell us something. This was all just a big ploy, just some sort of stupid infomercial that I turned on, and it's not true. I'm not selling anything, not trying to make any money at all here. Maybe in the long run I am. This is all just a goodwill ploy out there as a businessman, a bidnaz man, trying to build goodwill with my worldwide global audience. So, when one of these days when I do get down to business, hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You know what I'm saying? That's right. Okay. Start our own little Masonic secret society. Our own little Rotary Club. Okay, but anyway. You know what I'm trying to say. I do this because I have an intense interest in it. I love financial planning, and I love sharing it with other people. And if it helps people get their houses in order, literally, then that's great. That's the only thing I care about, man. Connecting with you. I just want to connect with you. That's all. It's all about love, man. It's all about love. All right, so a standard renter's insurance policy covers furniture, carpets, appliances, clothing, and most other personal items. For their cash, this is what I do for fun. Some people watch TV, play games, video games, whatever. I'm a YouTuber, man. It's been a while actually since I've been on YouTube, but blogger, content creator, I guess you could call it that. I just love creating content. I always loved writing, and I love sharing it with people. So whatever. That's what I do for fun, man. This is how I entertain myself. A standard renter's insurance policy covers furniture, carpets, appliances, clothing, and most other personal items for their cash value at the time of loss. Expect to pay around $200 to $250 a year for about $15,000 in coverage, depending on where you live. For maximum protection, you can buy replacement cost insurance, which pays the actual cost of replacing articles with comparable ones, though some policies limit the payout to 4 times the cash value. You will pay more for this, perhaps as little as another 10%, perhaps much more, depending on the insurer. Also, the standard renter's policy provides limited coverage of such valuables as jewelry, furs, and silverware. Coverage varies, although some insurers pay up to $1,000 for the loss of watches, gems, and furs, and up to $2,500 for silverware. For larger amounts, you need an endorsement or a separate policy called a PPF. All right, PPF. Renter's insurance pays for losses caused by fire or lightning, explosion, windstorms, hail, theft, civil commotion, aircraft, vehicles, smoke, vandalism, and malicious mischief, falling objects, building collapse, and the weight of ice and snow. Certain damages caused by water, steam, electricity, appliances, and frozen pipes are covered as well. Plus, if your resident cannot be occupied because of if your residence cannot be occupied because of damage from any of those perils, the insurer will pay for any increase in living expenses resulting from staying at a hotel and eating in restaurants. The liability coverage also pays for damages and legal costs arising from injuries or damage caused by you, a member of your family, or a pet on or off your premises. Okay. On or off your premises. The objectives and rewards of investing. So, you're probably wondering when we are finally going to come to this. You're like, man, I thought this was personal financial planning. What is all this boring shit about insurance and blah, 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 and decreasing my debt? And what are you doing? This shit is boring. It has nothing to do with the big world of finance. And actually, it has everything to do with it, ladies and gentlemen. It's called entering the investing class. Okay? Any financial advisor worth his salt will tell you, look, I can set up some sort of investment plan for you, but the first thing you need to do is get rid of all your debt and make sure you have really good make sure everything's insured. Make sure you got all your insurance coverage and then after you got all that taken care of, then you can worry about investing. That's just, look, I hate to, be a wet blanket, but them's the facts. You got to pay off your debts first. That's the most important part of your financial plan. Get rid of that debt. Make sure you got good insurance on everything. That way, then you can start investing in stuff. Because that way, if something bad happens, that way you can factor that into your plan. Something bad and unexpected happens. That's already factored into your plan because you have insurance to cover that. And you can still keep investing, even in the bad times. So it's important before you start thinking about investing to have a good, firm, solid foundation to create, to build your financial plan upon. And so, if you're too focused on investing before you have that foundation built, that good solid foundation, being debt free. And you got mortgage. It's a different story. Mortgages. All right. Anyway, let's. Mortgage is a different story, but it's got to be factored in. You have to reel in that out of control spending. Period. End of story. So, and then if you got a mortgage or something, that's okay. Anyway, it'll all be anyway. We'll talk more about that. So anyway, let's talk about objectives and rewards of investing, shall we? People invest their money for all sorts of reasons. Some do it as a way to accumulate the down payment on a new home. Others do it as a way to supplement their income. Still others invest to build up a nest egg for retirement. Actually, the term investment means different things to different people. That is, while millions of people invest regularly in securities like stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, others speculate in commodities or options. Investing is generally considered to take more of a long-term perspective and is viewed as a process of purchasing securities, wherein stability of value and level of return are somewhat predictable. Speculating, on the other hand, is viewed as a short-term activity that involves the buying and selling of securities in which future value and expected return are highly uncertain. Obviously, speculation is far more risky than investing. So, if you are like most investors, at first you will probably keep your funds in some form of savings vehicle. Once you have sufficient savings for emergencies and other purposes, you can begin to build up a pool of investable capital. This often means making sacrifices and doing what you can to live within your budget. Granted, it is far easier to spend money than to save it. But if you are really serious about getting into investments, you are going to have to accumulate the necessary capital. In addition to a savings and capital accumulation program, it is also important to have adequate insurance coverage to provide protection against the unexpected. For our purposes here, we will assume you are adequately insured and that the cost of insurance coverage is built into your family's monthly cash budget. Ample insurance and liquidity, cash and savings, with which to meet life's emergencies are two investment prerequisites that are absolutely essential for the development of a successful investment program. Once these conditions are met, you are ready to start investing. All right, here's a smart website to go to. With so many investing websites, how can you find what you need? Start with an opinionated guide to the web's best investing sites. That's winninginvesting.com. Winninginvesting.com for links to useful websites listed by category. An added benefit, most of them are free. So, I don't know. That's all. So, like I said, yeah, whenever I'm, most of these sites that I recommend to you during the show, not getting paid for this, they're all pretty much free sites. So, this is like my religion, man. It's financial planning, personal financial planning. It's my religion. So, it's very important. The financial illiteracy is a huge problem in this country, and whatever. We've gotta wake people up, man. Teach them how to be responsible with this credit. Okay. How do I know? How do I get started? Then maybe eventually we can get our government. If the people start doing that, maybe at some point we can get our government to start being responsible with credit. But okay, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to get political. That's not what this show is about, man. It's about solutions. Solution revolution. How do I get started? Okay, contrary to what you may believe, there is really nothing magical about the topic of investments. In fact, as long as you have the capital to do so, it is really quite easy to get started in investing. The terminology may seem baffling at times, and some of the procedures and techniques quite complicated. But do not let that mislead you into thinking there is no room for the small individual investor. Nothing could be farther from the truth. For individual investors, have a wide array of securities and investment vehicles to choose from. Further, opening an investment account is no more difficult than opening a checking account. Yeah, you just gotta have I know now most people do their banking online, of course. But yeah, if you go to your bank's website, most of them now will say, hey, if you want to take part in our investing services or whatever, click here. Granted, almost always you need they want you to have like $5,000 to minimum to start up a plan. But hey, if you got $5,000 to play around with, uh, you know, uh, might want to look into that. Yeah, just go to like I said, next time your bank's website, doing your online banking. I'm almost positive. I know my bank does. There's a little link there if you want to take part in their investment program. They have good investment programs. So I would recommend checking it out. So anyway, it's no more difficult than opening a checking account. So there you go. It's another little tip for you. How then do you get started? To begin with, you need some money. Not a lot. 500 or to 1,000 will do. Okay, what are you saying? Although 4 or 5,000 would be better. Okay, I just thought, in my bank, you gotta have $5,000 minimum before but like I said, five. Let's see. Okay, so let's see here. 4,000, 5,000 will be better. And remember, this is investment capital we are talking about here. Money you have accumulated above and beyond any basic emergency savings. In addition to money, you need knowledge and know-how. You should never invest in something you are not sure about. That is the quickest way to lose money. Learn as much as you can about the market, different types of securities, and various trading strategies. Taking a course on personal finance is a good start, but you may want to do more. For one thing, you can become a regular reader of publications such as Money or the Rant with Charles Lanson. Just keep coming back to this site. Anyway, publications. Okay, I gotta disagree. Publications such as Money, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and Forbes. I say, phooey on that. Keep coming back to my blog. Those guys, that's a bunch of government-sponsored propaganda, ladies and gentlemen. No, I don't know. It's a good place to start. I don't know. I subscribed to the Wall Street Journal for a while. It's just pretty much it's so politically biased now. It's just not even, it's just propaganda, man. So I gotta disagree with this. Whatever. This is not true. Okay. So if you want good sound, quality advice, do your own research or go back to my blog. Go back to my blog. Listen to my podcast. Watch me on YouTube. I will not let you down. You will not regret it. Within 5 years, I guarantee you, within 5 years, practice some of the principles I'm talking about. Keep coming back, watching me on YouTube, listening to my podcast, reading my blog. Make it a part. Habitualize yourself to do this. And I guarantee you will not regret it. In 5 years, you will notice a vast difference in your income. Okay, so, am I offering you a get rich quick scheme? No, I'm not. Because get rich quick schemes are bullshit. But if you want to learn sound, responsible money management and personal financial planning strategies, then you're in the right place, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so Gitman and Jank, writers of personal financial planning. By the way, I'm borrowing heavily from these guys, and this little analysis I'm doing. It's basically, I'm borrowing heavily from this book, Personal Financial Planning, written by Gitman and Jink. Okay, on page 435, they strongly suggest that after you have learned a few things about stocks and bonds, you set up a portfolio of securities on paper and make paper trades in and out of your portfolio for 6 months to a year to get a feel for what it is like and lose money in the market. This is very important. This is a very great, sound piece of advice as well. So I'm going to repeat this. They strongly suggest after you have learned a few things about stocks and bonds, set up a portfolio of securities on paper and make paper trades in and out of your portfolio for 6 months to a year to get a feel of what it is like to make and lose money in the market. Start out with an imaginary sum of, say, $50,000. As long as you're going to dream, you might as well make it worthwhile. Then you keep track of the stocks and bonds you hold. Record the number of shares bought and sold, dividend received, and so on. Throughout this exercise, be sure to use actual prices and keep it as realistic as possible. You might want to use one of the portfolio tracking programs offered at such websites as Quicken.com or MoneyCentral.msn.com. There's also, Yahoo Finance. I'm not sure if they offer a portfolio. You got Yahoo Finance. You got Google Finance. There's tons of, and that a lot of these, they have a lot of really good free stuff at these sites, but then they have like premium places to go as well, where you can pay to get more a little bit more, a little bit better information, more precise information. But if you don't want to, it's a good way to learn. If you don't want to spend money right off the bat and you just want to learn a little bit, these sites are really good to go to. The free parts, just to kind of learn the ropes a little bit. So there are some powerful internet sites out there that make it very easy to track the behavior of a portfolio of securities. The advantage to creating a paper portfolio is clear. If you are going to make mistakes in the market, you are much better off doing so on paper. Also, if your parents, relatives, or friends have done a lot of investing, talk to them. Communicate, man. Talk to them. Find out what they have to say about investing. Pick up some pointers and possibly even learn from their mistakes. Eventually, you will gain a familiarity with the market and become comfortable with the way things are done there. Comfortable? We'll keep the baby comfortable. Okay, when that happens, you will be ready to take the plunge. At that point, you will also need a way to invest, more specifically, a broker and some investment vehicle in which to invest. The stockbroker is the party through whom you will be buying and selling stocks, bonds, and other securities. If your relatives or friends have a broker they like and trust, have them introduce you to him or her. Alternatively, visit several of the brokerage firms in your community. Talk to one of their brokers about your available investment funds and your investment objectives. As a beginning investor with limited funds, it is probably best to confine your investment activity to the basics. Stick to stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Avoid getting fancy, and certainly do not try to make a killing each and every time you invest. That will only lead to frustration, disappointment, and very possibly heavy losses. Further, be patient. Do not expect the price of the stock to double overnight, and do not panic when things fail to work out as expected in the short run. After all, security prices do occasionally go down. Finally, remember that you do not need spectacular returns in order to make a lot of money in the market. Instead, be consistent and let the concept of compound interest work for you. Do that, and you will find that just $2,000 a year invested at the fairly conservative rate of 10% will grow to well over $100,000 in 20 years. 20 years. While the type of security in which you invest is a highly personal decision, you might want to give serious consideration to some sort of mutual fund as your first investment. Mutual funds provide professional management and diversification that individual investors, especially those with limited resources, can rarely obtain on their own. Okay, here's a smart website for you. Zacks Investment Research. Zacks.com offers a comprehensive investing 101 tutorial and a glossary of financial terms. Once again, completely free. There's no gimmick here. I know everyone's like, yeah, everybody's got a gimmick and blah, blah, blah. The fact is, no, it's like I don't have a gimmick. I just like doing this for fun. I like learning this stuff. And the best way to learn it is to put yourself in a position to teach it, right? I guess, I don't know. That's what I read in the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's what Stephen R. Covey recommends. So, I mean, he wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I mean, so okay, moving on. I mean, who am I to argue with Stephen R. Covey? Who are you to argue with Stephen R. Covey? He's a great man, a great American. All right. Stephen R. Covey. God, man, come on. Man, let's take wow. All right, we're talking about making transactions in the securities markets. In many respects, dealing in the securities markets almost seems like you are operating in another world. One with all kinds of unusual orders and strange sounding transactions. Actually, making securities transactions is relatively simple once you understand the basics. In fact, you will probably find it is no more difficult than using a checking account. Indeed, while making money in the market is not all that easy, making transactions is. Oh. Making transactions is. Stockbrokers. Stockbrokers, or account executives and financial consultants, as they are also called, financial advisors in some cases, purchase and sell securities for their customers. Although deeply ingrained in our language, the term stockbroker is usually somewhat of a misnomer because such an individual assists you in the purchase and sale of not only stocks, but also bonds, convertibles, mutual funds, options, and many other types of securities. Brokers must be licensed by the exchanges and must abide by the strict ethical guidelines of the exchanges and the SEC. They work for brokerage firms and, in essence, are there to execute the orders placed. The largest stock brokerage firm, Merrill Lynch, has brokerage offices in virtually every major U.S. city and many foreign countries. Orders from these offices are transmitted by brokers to the main office of Merrill Lynch and then to the floor of one of the stock exchanges or the OTC market, where they are executed. Although the procedure for executing orders on organized exchanges differs a bit from that in the OTC market, you as an investor would never know the difference because you would place your order with the broker in exactly the same fashion. Selecting a broker. If you decide to start investing with the so-called full-service broker, it is important to select someone who understands your investment objectives and who can effectively help you pursue them. If you choose a broker whose own disposition toward investing is similar to yours, you should be able to avoid conflict and establish a solid working relationship. A good place to start the search is to ask friends, relatives, or business associates to recommend a broker. It is not important and often not even advisable to know your stockbroker socially, because most, if not all, of your transactions or orders will probably be placed by phone. In addition, a strict business relationship eliminates the possibility of social concerns interfering with the achievement of your investment objectives. This does not mean, of course, that your broker's sole interest should be commissions. Indeed, a broker should be far more than just a salesperson. A good broker is someone who is more interested in your investments than his or her commissions. Should you find you're dealing with someone who is always trying to get you to trade your stocks, or who is pushing new investments on you, then by all means dump that broker and find a new one. Drop that zero and get a hero, baby. Okay, kick him to the curb. All right, full service discount. Full service discount and online brokers. Just a few years ago, there were three distinct types of brokers: full service, discount, and online, and each occupied a well-defined market niche. Niche. I hate that word. I never know how to pronounce niche. Well-defined market niche. Okay. Today, the lines between these three types of brokers are no longer clear-cut. Most brokerage firms, even the most traditional ones, now offer online services to compete with the increasingly popular online firms. And many discount brokers now offer services once available only from a full-service broker, like research reports for clients. The traditional full-service broker offers investors a full array of brokerage services and margin loans. Such services are fine for those investors who want such help and are willing to pay for them. In contrast, those investors who simply want to execute trades that are not interested in obtaining all those brokerage services should consider either a discount broker or online broker. Discount brokers tend to have low overhead operations and offer fewer customer services than full-service brokers. Those with the very lowest commissions and who offer hardly any of the normal broker services other than executing trades are called deep discounters. Many discount brokers, however, do provide research and other services, but charging the broker's website and placing the desired buy or sell order. Let's see here. The brokerage firm then executes the order at the best possible price and confirms the details of the transaction by phone, email, or regular mail. Depending on the size of the transaction discount, brokers can save investors from 30 to 80% of the commissions charged by full-service brokers. So, with the technology that is available to almost anyone today, it is not surprising that investors can just as easily trade securities online as on the phone. All you need is an online broker, also called internet or electronic brokers. And you too can execute trades electronically. The investor merely accesses the online broker's website to open an account, review the commission schedule, or see a demonstration of the available transactional services and procedures. Confirmation of electronic trades can take as little as 10 seconds, and most occur within 1 minute. Online investing is becoming increasingly popular, particularly among affluent young investors who enjoy surfing the web. So much so, in fact, that it has prompted virtually every traditional full-service broker and many discount brokers to offer online trading to their clients. Okay, here's a smart website for you. Confused about which is right for you? Use the Motley Fools checklist. 10 ways to size up a broker at the Fools Discount Brokerage section. That's www.fool.com. All right. Brokerage services. While discount or online brokers offer little more than execution of trades, that is certainly not the case with full-service brokers. Indeed, these brokers offer their clients a wide variety of brokerage services. For that reason, selecting a good brokerage firm, a brokerage firm is often just as important as choosing a good broker, because not all brokerage firms provide the same services. Try to select a broker with whom you can work and who is affiliated with a firm that provides the type of services you are looking for. Many brokerage firms, for example, provide all sorts of information, ranging from stock and bond guides to research reports on specific securities or industries. Some have a research staff that periodically issues analysis of economic, market, industry, or company behavior and events, and relates them to its recommendations for buying or selling certain securities. As a brokerage firm client, you can expect to receive monthly bulletins discussing market activity and possibly even a recommended investment list. You will also receive an account statement describing all of your transactions for the period, commission charges, interest charges, dividends, and highest received, the securities you currently hold, and your account balances. All right, end of the big show. I want to thank you all for tuning in. You definitely want to catch the next podcast or YouTube clip. It'll be on the blog as well. So I'm gonna have a little seance. I'm gonna channel the spirit of Alfred Marshall. He's going to talk about principles of economics. I'm going to show some cripple guy fitness workout tips. And what else? And then I'm going to talk more about personal financial planning. So you won't want to miss a single second of that. But, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great day.